it's hard to understand what emotional regulation is, and children who've had trauma have a difference in their ability to do regulation in many ways. Regulation can be emotional regulation, and that's the ability to control the way that you experience and modulate your emotions. It can also be sensory, where you have difficulty processing sensory input. And then there's also impulse regulation. So that's the ability to raise and lower your energy level, check your impulses. So all of that is impacted by trauma and makes regulation for kids who've had trauma more difficult. This slide shows gives a visual for what the differences can be when you have a child who has had trauma. And the curved line is a child who's been affected by trauma, and the straight line is a more typical child. And if you look at, the left side is going from calm to alert, alarm, fear, and terror. And then the bottom is a depiction of things that happen to us in our day. So it starts with rest when you wake up in the morning, and kids who have not had trauma and are more typically neurologically typical too will wake up and they're calm when they wake up. You can see the child with trauma gets alert much quicker even after they've been resting. And then their day goes on and something novel happens. Pretty much you can have a routine day, but most days something unusual will happen. You know, maybe we're out of Cocoa Puffs today, or the bus is a little bit late, or you know, mom isn't downstairs exactly when I expect her to be. So that's something novel for a child who's typical. They're going to have an uptick, a little bit of an alert, but the child that has trauma, they're already into alarm when something novel happens to them. And so then if you go into a mild challenge, let's say they get on the bus and Johnny calls them a stupid face, that the child who's typical is in alarm at that point. The child who's had trauma is in terror. And so their heart is pumping, they may have difficulty breathing, and they might feel nauseous. They may have an impulse to fight the person. They might not be able to control that impulse because their regulation is poor, and they may be hitting even before they've had a chance to process or think about the consequences. So that's one of the reasons that kids who've had trauma, you'll see sometimes really extreme behaviors, because that regulation is different than a typical child.